Ambassador Alina Vasquez took a deep breath and stepped through the massive golden doors. The chamber before her was the largest she had ever seen. It stretched upward like a cathedral made of light and metal. Thousands of seats rose in a great circle, and in those seats sat creatures from across the galaxy. Some had scales. Some had wings. Some were made of crystal or gas or living metal. All of them turned to look at the small human woman walking toward the central platform. Alina had trained her whole life for this moment. She had learned 14 alien languages. She had studied the customs of 300 species. She had practiced her speech until every word was perfect. Today, she would ask the Galactic Concord to accept Earth into the Interstellar Coalition. Today, humanity would finally take its place among the stars. The platform was a simple white circle in the center of the chamber. Alina stood upon it and felt very small. Above her, the High Counselor watched from his throne of crystal. His name was Thexan, and he had ruled the coalition for 600 years. His body was made of living gemstone, and when he moved, he made sounds like wind chimes in a storm. Alina activated her translator and began to speak. "Honored members of the Galactic Concord," she said. Her voice echoed through the chamber. "I come before you as the representative of Earth and all humanity. For 40 years, we have traveled among the stars. We have met many of you in peace. We have traded with you. We have learned from you. Today, I humbly request that Earth be granted membership in the Interstellar Coalition." She paused and waited for a response. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then the laughter began. It started with a wet, gurgling sound from the left side of the chamber. Alina turned and saw the hive speakers, a race of giant insects with too many eyes and mouths full of clicking teeth. They were laughing at her. The sound spread like a disease. Soon, hundreds of species were making their own versions of laughter. Some howled. Some whistled. Some vibrated their entire bodies until the floor shook. Alina stood perfectly still. Her face showed nothing. High Counselor Thexan raised one crystalline hand, and the laughter slowly died down. He leaned forward on his throne and looked at Alina with eyes that glowed like blue stars. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said. His voice was beautiful and cold. "Earth is what we call a quarantantier species. Do you know what that means?" Alina knew exactly what it meant, but she said nothing. "It means," Thexan continued, "that your kind is too young, too aggressive, and too fragile to deserve a seat in this chamber. You achieved faster-than-light travel only 40 years ago. The Volari waited 3,000 years before they were considered worthy. The Kethrix waited 8,000 years. And you come here after only 40 years and ask to sit among us as equals?" More laughter rippled through the chamber. Alina remained silent. The hive speakers spoke next. Their voice was a chorus of clicks and hisses that the translator turned into words. "We have studied your species," they said. "You are short-lived vermin. Your entire civilization could rise and fall in the time it takes us to decide what to eat for dinner. Why should we care what happens to creatures who die so quickly?" A gaseous being called the Void Collective swirled in its containment field. "We question whether solid-form organisms can even possess true intelligence," it said. "Your brains are made of meat. How can meat think? How can meat feel? You are biological machines pretending to be people." The monolith, a species of living silicon, spoke in a voice like grinding stones. "We have examined your cultural exports, your music, your art, your stories. We find them to be neurological pollution. They create irrational emotional responses. They serve no logical purpose. A species that wastes resources on such things cannot be trusted with coalition membership." One by one, more species added their voices. The Volari called humans cosmic children playing with dangerous toys. The Kethrix, said Earth, was a planet of chaos that would infect the galaxy with disorder. A race of energy beings declared that humans had souls too dim to register on any meaningful scale. Alina listened to every word. Her small recording device captured everything. When the insults finally stopped, High Counselor Thexan spread his crystal arms wide. "The Concord has spoken," he said. "Earth's request for membership is denied. Perhaps in a few thousand years, when your species has matured, you may try again. If you still exist by then." The chamber filled with laughter once more. Dexon looked down at Alina with what might have been pity. "Do you have anything to say, Ambassador?" Alina looked up at him. For the first time since the laughter began, she allowed herself to smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won a game that no one else knew they were playing. "High Counselor," she said, "you have made your position very clear. I want to thank you for your honesty. I want to thank all of you for showing humanity exactly what you think of us." She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. "I will make sure that every human being hears your words today. All 9 billion of them. I will make sure they know exactly how the Great Galactic Concord sees their children, as their parents, their friends, and their dreams." Dexon tilted his head. "Is that a threat, Ambassador?" "No," Alina said. "It is a promise." She turned and walked toward the golden doors. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. No one laughed now. Something in her voice had changed the air in the room as she reached the doors. She stopped and looked back one final time. "You called us young," she said. "You are right. You called us aggressive. That is also true. You called us short-lived. We are. We do not have thousands of years to wait for respect. We do not have centuries to prove ourselves to those who have already decided we are worthless." Her smile grew wider. "Oh, you forgot something important. Short-lived creatures learn to move fast. Aggressive creatures learn to fight smart, and young species have nothing to lose." She walked through the doors and let them close behind her. Her ship left Coalition space within 1 hour. During the journey home, she transmitted her recording to Earth. Every news station played it. Every screen showed the laughing faces of the aliens. Every speaker carried the words of the Hive speakers, the Void Collective, and High Counselor Vexen 9 billion humans watched and listened. 9 billion humans felt the same cold anger building in their hearts. Within 12 hours, the United Terran Congress called an emergency session. Leaders from every nation on Earth gathered in one room. They watched the recording together. They listened to the insults together. And when it was over, they looked at each other and made a decision. No votes were needed. No debates were necessary. For the first time in human history, every nation agreed on something the galaxy had laughed at. Humanity would make sure the galaxy never laughed again. Within 24 hours, Operation Fallen Star was activated, and nothing in the universe would ever be the same. Director Marcus Chen sat alone in his office deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland. The room was dark except for the glow of a dozen screens. Each screen showed a different part of the galaxy. Trade routes, military bases, communication networks, financial systems. He had been watching these screens for 30 years, waiting for this moment. His phone rang. He answered it without looking away from the screens. "Director Chen," said the voice on the other end. It was the Secretary General of the United Terran Congress. The vote was unanimous. "You have full authorization. Operation Fallen Star is a go." "Understood," Chen said. "Timeline: midnight, Terran Standard Time. You have 6 hours." The call ended. Chen allowed himself a small smile. 6 hours. After 30 years of preparation, it would all come down to 6 hours. He pressed a button on his desk. Around the world and across the galaxy, 1,000 encrypted messages were sent to 1,000 carefully placed operatives. The messages contained only 2 words: stars falling. The Coalition thought they understood humanity. They were wrong. When humans first achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years ago, they found a galaxy already full of ancient civilizations. The Interstellar Coalition controlled everything. They had the best technology. They had the strongest armies. They had trade agreements that covered millions of worlds. Earth was small and weak and new. The Coalition looked at humanity and saw nothing worth fearing. That was their first mistake. Director Chen had understood the truth from the very beginning. The Coalition was not what it appeared to be. Behind the grand speeches about galactic unity and cooperation was something much darker. The elder species, the ones who had founded the coalition 12,000 years ago, controlled everything. They controlled the trade routes. They controlled the communication networks. They controlled the flow of technology and resources and information. The younger species were not partners. They were servants. They paid tribute in resources, in labor, and sometimes in their own people. Species that refused to join the coalition were isolated and starved until they surrendered. Species that tried to leave were crushed. The coalition was not an alliance. It was an empire wearing a mask. Chen had spent 3 decades gathering proof. He sent human hackers into coalition networks, where they planted themselves like seeds and grew roots into every system. He sent human economists to map every trade agreement, every debt, every secret deal. Made in dark rooms. He sent human diplomats to smile and shake hands while quietly learning which species were happy, which species were suffering in silence. What he found was worse than he had imagined. The hive speakers. Those insects who had called humans vermin were running illegal genetic harvesting operations. They kidnapped members of dozens of species, extracted useful DNA, and sold biological patents worth trillions of credits. The species they harvested from never saw a single credit. The Volari. Those ancient beings who had waited 3,000 years for coalition membership had a secret. Their great technological advancement was not their own. They had stolen it from another species and then destroyed that species to hide the truth. An entire civilization had been erased so the Volari could claim credit for their achievements. The Void Collective. Those gaseous beings who questioned whether humans could think were being slowly poisoned by the coalition. Their homeworlds were being contaminated with chemicals that made them dependent on imported atmosphere. If they ever tried to leave the coalition, they would suffocate. High Counselor Thexan himself had been stealing from the Coalition Relief Fund for 3 centuries. Money meant for starving colonies went into his private accounts. Ships meant for rescue operations were sold to the highest bidder. Millions had died while he grew richer. Every species in the coalition had secrets. Every species had crimes. And Director Chen had proof of all of it, but he waited. He gathered more evidence. He built more connections. He made more plans. And all the while, humanity smiled and played the role of the eager young species desperate for approval. Ambassador. Vasquez's request for coalition membership was never meant to succeed. It was a test. Chen wanted to see how the coalition would respond to humanity's ambition. Would they welcome Earth? Would they reject Earth politely? Or would they show their true nature? They showed their true nature. The laughter in the council chamber was exactly what Chen had hoped for. It gave humanity a reason. It united 9 billion people behind a common cause. And most importantly, it gave Chen the authorization he needed, now. Sitting in his dark office, began to activate the pieces he had placed across the galaxy. On the Coalition's central financial hub, a human analyst named Sarah Kim received the message. She had worked there for 15 years, slowly climbing the ranks, slowly gaining access to more and more sensitive systems. Tonight, she would download every financial record in the Coalition database and send it to Earth, on the Hive Speaker's homeworld. A human researcher named James Okonkwo received the message. He had spent 10 years studying their biology, earning their trust, learning their secrets. Tonight, he would release evidence of their genetic harvesting operations to every news network in the galaxy. On a dozen different worlds, human journalists, scientists, engineers, and diplomats received the same message. They had all been waiting. They had all been preparing. And now, they all began to move. Director Chen watched his screens as reports started coming in. The first files were being extracted. The first transmissions were being prepared. The first dominoes were starting to fall. He thought about the High Counselor's words. Humans were young. Humans were aggressive. Humans were short-lived. All of those things were true, but the Coalition had forgotten something important. Young species had no tradition of accepting unfair rules. Aggressive species did not give up when they were insulted, and short-lived creatures understood that if they wanted justice, they had to move fast. The clock on Chen's wall showed 3 hours until midnight. Across the galaxy, 1,000 operatives were in position. Servers were being accessed. Files were being copied. Transmission arrays were being prepared. Chen picked up his phone and made one final call. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said when she answered. "Are you ready?" "I have been ready for 30 years, she replied. "Good, when this is over. The galaxy will never see humanity the same way again. That is the point." "Director," she ended the call. Chen leaned back in his chair and watched the clock count down. In 3 hours, Operation Fallen Star would begin. The Coalition had built its power on secrets and lies. Tonight, humanity would drag those secrets into the light. They had called humans primitive. They had called humans vermin. They had laughed at the idea that Earth could ever matter. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The clock struck midnight, and across the galaxy, the stars began to fall. The first leak hit the galactic networks at exactly 0:01 Terran Standard Time. It was a single file, small enough to fit on any personal device, but its contents shook the galaxy like an earthquake. The file contained 300 years of financial records from High Counselor Thexen's personal accounts. Every stolen credit was documented. Every diverted relief shipment was listed. Every bribe he had taken and every official he had paid was named for 6 centuries. Thexen had presented himself as the symbol of coalition integrity. His crystalline species was famous for their honesty. They could not lie, people said. Their transparent bodies showed their emotions too clearly for deception. The galaxy trusted them completely. Now the galaxy learned that. Trust had been a mistake. The file spread faster than anyone could stop it. News networks picked it up within minutes. Translators converted it into thousands of languages. By the time Nexon woke up and checked his communications, half the galaxy had already seen proof of his crimes. He tried to deny it. He called the files fake. He blamed human hackers for creating false evidence. But the details were too specific. The account numbers were real. The dates matched official records. And worst of all, other coalition officials started coming forward to confirm what they had always suspected but never dared to say. The second wave of leaks came. 30 minutes later, this time, the target was the Hive speakers. The files included genetic samples, research logs, and shipping manifests. They showed that the Hive speakers had been kidnapping members of 37 different species for decades. They extracted DNA, created biological patents, and sold the results to the highest bidder. The victims were usually released with damaged memories, never knowing what had been taken from them. The species who had been harvested learned the truth at the same moment as everyone else. The Karathi, a peaceful reptilian race, discovered that their famous healing abilities had been stolen and sold without their knowledge. The Meniks, small furry creatures known for their speed, found out that their DNA was being used to create military enhancement drugs. Dozens of species realized that their own bodies had been turned into products. The anger spread like fire. On the Korathi homeworld, protesters surrounded the Hive Speaker embassy. On Menik stations, workers refused to load any ships bound for Hive Speaker space. Species that had been rivals for centuries suddenly found common ground in their shared outrage. The third wave came 1 hour after midnight. This time, the leaks targeted the Volari, those ancient beings who had waited 3,000 years for coalition membership. The files told a story that had been buried for millennia, long ago. Before the Volari joined the coalition, there was another species in their region of space. They were called the Zenthari. They were brilliant inventors who created technologies far beyond anything else in the galaxy. They shared their knowledge freely with their neighbors, including the primitive Valar. The Volari learned quickly, too quickly, and when they had learned enough, they turned on their teachers. The files showed everything. Battle plans, death counts, the systematic destruction of Zenthari cities, the burning of their libraries, the execution of their scientists, The Valari had not just stolen Xanthari technology. They had erased the Xanthari from existence to hide their crime for 3,000 years. The Valari had claimed their achievements as their own. They had accepted praise and honor and respect built on the graves of the species they had murdered. Now the galaxy knew the truth, but the worst was still to come. At 2 o'clock Terran Standard Time, humanity released the trade data. This was not a single file or a handful of documents. This was everything. Every trade agreement the Coalition had ever made. Every price-fixing scheme. Every artificial shortage. Every backroom deal that had kept some species rich while others starved. The data showed that the Coalition had been manipulating food supplies for thousands of years. When a colony needed grain, the Coalition would delay shipments until prices rose. When a planet had a medical emergency, the Coalition would hold back medicine until the local government agreed to unfavorable terms. Species that complained were quietly punished. Species that cooperated were rewarded with slightly less exploitation. The pattern was clear. The elder species of the Coalition did not see the younger species as partners. They saw them as resources to be managed. Every trade agreement was designed to extract maximum value while giving minimum return. Every alliance was a chain wearing the disguise of friendship. Species that had been told they were backward and undeveloped learned that they had been kept that way on purpose. Colonies that had blamed themselves for their poverty discovered that their poverty had been manufactured. Governments that had trusted the Coalition realized that trust had been their greatest weakness. The communications networks, overloaded as billions of beings tried to process what they were learning. Arguments broke out on every world. Old friendships shattered. Old enemies found unexpected common cause. High Counselor Thexon called an emergency session of the Galactic Concord. He demanded that the Coalition military find and destroy the humans responsible for the leaks. He called for Earth to be blockaded, invaded, and brought to justice. But when he looked around the council chamber, he saw something he had never seen before. Empty seats. The Void Collective had already withdrawn. Their representatives had left the moment they learned about the atmospheric poisoning. The Karathi refused to attend any session that included the Hive speakers. The Monolith, those silicon beings who had called human culture pollution, had gone silent after learning that their sacred computing contracts were actually a form of debt slavery. Even species that had not been directly harmed were leaving. They had seen enough. If the Coalition could do these things to its own members, what would it do to anyone who stayed loyal? Dexon stood in his chamber and watched his empire crumble. Across the galaxy, alliances that had lasted thousands of years were dissolving in hours. Trade routes that had functioned since before humans existed were going silent. The careful structure that the elder species had built over 12 millennia was falling apart. And at the center of it all, humanity watched and waited. They had not fired a single shot. They had not destroyed a single ship. They had not killed a single being. They had simply told the truth, and the truth, it turned out, was more powerful than any weapon ever built by dawn on Earth. 142 species had formally withdrawn from the Interstellar Coalition. The greatest power structure in galactic history was breaking into pieces. The Council had mocked Earth. Now Earth was tearing down everything they had built, and the night was not over yet. High Counselor. Dexon stood before his communication array and tried to save his empire. His crystal body flickered with stress, colors shifting from blue to angry red as he spoke to one leader after another. He made promises. He offered deals. He begged. He threatened. Nothing worked. The Meridian Compact, a trade agreement between 40 species that had lasted for 6,000 years, collapsed before sunrise. The member species simply stopped answering each other's calls. Ships that had been traveling together for generations turned away from each other and headed home. The Kethrix, those ancient beings who had waited 8,000 years for Coalition membership, sent a single transmission to Earth. It said only, "We should have laughed with you," and they cut all communications with Coalition space and sealed their borders. The Void Collective did something that had never happened in their recorded history. They evacuated. Millions of gaseous beings abandoned their ancestral worlds and fled into deep space, preferring the cold emptiness between stars to another day under Coalition control. The atmospheric poisoning had not yet killed them, but it would, slowly, over centuries. They chose freedom and eventual death over comfortable slavery. On the Hive Speaker's homeworld, civil war broke out. The younger generations had not known about the genetic harvesting. When they learned what their elders had done in their name, they rose up in fury. Hive cities that had stood for 10,000 years burned as children fought against parents, workers against queens. The species that had called humanity vermin was now destroying itself. The Valari retreated into isolation. Their great universities, once filled with students from across the galaxy, emptied within days. No one wanted to learn from teachers whose knowledge was built on genocide. No one wanted to honor a species that had murdered its way to greatness. The Valari had spent 3,000 years building their reputation. They lost it in a single night. Dexon watched it all from his throne room and felt something he had not felt in 600 years. Fear. He had ruled the Coalition through careful manipulation. He had kept species divided against each other, playing on old rivalries and manufactured conflicts. When the Korthi complained about trade deals, he told them the Meniks were getting better terms. When the Meniks asked for more resources, he blamed Karathi greed. Every species believed they were being treated unfairly because of some other species. No one realized they were all being treated unfairly by the same system. Now that system was gone. The lies were exposed. And species that had been taught to hate each other were discovering they had more in common with their old enemies than with their supposed leaders. Messages began arriving from across the galaxy. Species that had never spoken to each other before were forming new agreements. Trade routes were being redrawn. Defense pacts were being signed. A new order was emerging, one that did not include the elder species of the Coalition. Single quotes AA and called for his military commanders. If diplomacy would not work, perhaps force would, but the commanders did not come. The Coalition military had always been a tool of the elder species. Soldiers from younger species served and died while officers from older species gave orders and took credit. It was another inequality hidden behind noble words about shared sacrifice and galactic duty. The leaks had included military records too. Soldiers learned that their promotion rates were tied to their species, not their performance. Officers discovered that their strategic advice had been ignored for centuries because of where they were born. Veterans found out that their pensions had been reduced to fund luxuries for Coalition leadership. When Nexon called for his fleet, the younger species crews refused to answer. They had fought and bled for an empire that despised them. They would not do it again. On colony worlds throughout Coalition space, statues of Coalition founders were being torn down. Schools stopped teaching Coalition history. Children who had grown up memorizing the names of great Coalition heroes now learned that those heroes had been tyrants, thieves, and murderers. The monolith. Those silicon beings who had mocked human culture made a surprising announcement. They requested cultural exchange with Earth. They wanted to understand human art and music. They wanted to know how biological creatures could create things that stirred emotions even in beings made of stone. Humanity agreed. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. The monolith had been among the loudest voices against Earth in the council chamber. Now, they were reaching out in friendship. Other species noticed the Karathi ambassador, contacted Ambassador Vasquez, and apologized for supporting Earth's rejection. She invited human diplomats to visit Karathi worlds. The Meniks offered trade agreements with terms far more favorable than anything the Coalition had ever given. One by one, the species that had laughed at humanity began reaching out. Some apologized. Some offered partnership. Some simply asked to be left alone, afraid that humanity might punish them for their mockery. But humanity did not want punishment. They did not want revenge. They wanted something far more valuable. They wanted a galaxy built on truth instead of lies. Ambassador. Vasquez held a press conference visible across the galaxy. She stood before cameras and spoke simply. Humanity did not do this to destroy the Coalition, she said. We did this to free its victims. The elder species built their power on secrets. Those secrets are gone now. What happens next is not up to us. It is up to every species that wants to build something better. She paused and looked directly into the camera. Earth is not interested in ruling the galaxy. We are interested in living in a galaxy where no species rules over others. We are interested in trade that benefits everyone, not just the powerful. We are interested in truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. Her words spread across the stars. Species that had expected humanity to demand tribute or submission were surprised. Species that had feared human aggression found instead an offer of equality. Within one standard day of the Night of Revelations, 203 species had expressed interest in forming a new organization. Not an empire disguised as an alliance, but a true partnership of equals. No permanent leaders. No hidden agendas. No species above another. High Counselor Vexen made one final attempt to restore order. He broadcast a message across all channels, claiming that humanity had lied, that the leaked files were false, that the coalition was still the legitimate government of the galaxy. No. One believed him. His crystal body dimmed as he realized the truth. 600 years of power. 12,000 years of coalition history. All of it ending not with a battle, but with a broadcast. Not with weapons, but with words. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had simply opened its eyes. And now that the galaxy could see, it would never close its eyes again. 6 months had passed since the Night of Revelations. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before a window on a small space station, orbiting a neutral moon. Below her, ships from dozens of species were arriving. Above her, the stars shone with the light of 1 billion worlds. And behind her, a new chamber was being prepared for a new kind of gathering. The Forum of Free Worlds was about to hold its first official meeting. The station had been built quickly. With contributions from 203 species, it was not grand like the Coalition Council Chamber. There were no towering thrones or golden doors. The meeting room was a simple circle where every representative would sit at the same level, facing each other as equals. This had been humanity's only demand. No species above another ever. Elena turned from the window as her assistant approached. "Ambassador, the delegates are ready." She nodded and walked toward the chamber. The room was already filling when she entered. She saw faces she recognized and faces she had never seen before. The Karathi ambassador, a reptilian woman with kind eyes, smiled at her from across the room. The Menix representative, a small furry creature barely reaching Elena's knee, waved enthusiastically. Even the monolith had sent a delegate, being a black stone who sat perfectly still but somehow radiated warmth. Elena took her seat. It was no different from any other seat in the room. The first speaker rose. She was a Valari, surprisingly. Her species had lost everything in the Night of Revelations. But some of them had chosen to face their history instead of hiding from it. This Valari, named Tessura, spent the past 6 months working to document the crimes against the Zenthari, the species her ancestors had destroyed. "I speak for no one but myself," Tessura began. "My people are divided. Many refuse to acknowledge what we did. But some of us know that healing cannot begin without truth. I am here to say that the Valari will contribute to the Zenthari Memorial Fund. We will teach our children the real history. We will carry this shame so that we never forget what happens when a species believes itself superior to others." She sat down. No one applauded. No one condemned. They simply listened and remembered. Other speakers followed. A Void Collective representative reported that their people had found new homeworlds far from Coalition space. They were rebuilding slowly, but they were free for the first time in millennia. A former Hive speaker soldier, one who had fought against the Civil War's atrocities, spoke about the new government forming on his world, one that had outlawed the genetic harvesting forever. Story after story filled the room. Pain and hope mixed together. Old wounds were acknowledged. New beginnings were planned. Then it was Elena's turn. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. 6 months ago, she had stood in another chamber, before another audience, and been laughed at. Today, no one was laughing. "I was asked to speak about humanity's role in the events of the past 6 months," she said. "Some have called us heroes. Some have called us villains. Some have called us manipulators who planned this from the beginning." She paused. "That last group is correct," a murmur went through the chamber. "Humanity did plan this," Elena continued. "For 30 years we gathered information. We placed operatives throughout coalition space. We waited for the right moment, and when that moment came, we acted." She looked around the room, meeting eyes wherever she could. Some might ask, why? Why go through so much trouble? Why spend 30 years preparing for a single night? She took a breath, because we had no other choice. The room was silent. When humanity first reached the stars, we found a galaxy ruled by fear. The coalition controlled everything. Species that joined were exploited. Species that refused were destroyed. There was no path to equality, no way to earn respect, no hope for justice. She spread her hands. Could have accepted our place at the bottom. We could have served the elder species and hoped that someday, thousands of years from now, they might treat us fairly. But that is not who we are. Her voice grew stronger. "You called us aggressive. You were right. We are aggressive. We do not accept injustice quietly. We do not bow our heads and wait for others to free us. When we see wrong, we fight to make it right." She smiled, but it was a gentle smile this time. "You called us short-lived. That is also true. Our lives are brief compared to yours. We do not have millennia to wait for change. Every year matters to us. Every day matters. We cannot waste our short time accepting things that should not be accepted." She looked at the monolith delegate. "You called our art and music neurological pollution. Perhaps it is. Perhaps that is exactly why it matters. Our stories taught us that tyrants always fall. Our songs gave us courage when we had nothing else. Our art showed us that a better world was possible." She turned to address the full assembly. "Humanity did not tear down the coalition to rule in its place. We tore it down because it deserved to fall. And we offer nothing to replace it except this simple idea. Every species is equal. Every voice matters. Every being deserves dignity." She gestured at the room around them. This forum was not built by humanity alone. 203 species contributed to its construction. 203 species wrote its charter. 203 species chose to be here today. It's not because anyone forced them, but because they believe in something better. She sat down. That is humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not power. Not conquest. Just the truth, and the chance to build something new from its ashes. For a moment no one moved. Then the Korathi ambassador stood and began to applaud. The Menix joined her. Then the monolith, striking their stone hands together with a sound like thunder. One by one, every delegate in the room rose to their feet. It was not the cruel laughter that had filled the coalition chamber 6 months ago. It was something else entirely. It was respect. It was gratitude. It was hope. Alina felt tears forming in her eyes. She thought of Director Chen, who had died peacefully 2 months ago, knowing his life's work had succeeded. She thought of the operatives who had risked everything for this moment. She thought of the 9 billion humans on Earth who had watched their ambassador be humiliated and chosen to fight back with truth instead of weapons. The Forum of Free Worlds would face many challenges in the years ahead. Old hatreds would not disappear overnight. New problems would arise. The work of building a better galaxy had only just begun. But today, for the first time in galactic history, every species sat as equals. And that was enough. Outside the station, the stars continued to shine. Among them, a small blue planet called Earth orbited its sun, home to a young, aggressive, short-lived species that had just changed the course of the universe. They had been mocked for being different. They had turned that difference into their greatest strength, and the galaxy would never forget.